Hello, America and the world. This is Radio Free Market, and I'm your host, Aaron Brown, sitting in today for Michael McKay. We are behind the lines of socialism, my friends, and Radio Free Market is the voice of free people and free markets. Our topic today is How to Create New Jobs for Real, Part 2. And our guest is Dr. Walter Block, Professor of Economics at Loyola University, New Orleans. He's a senior fellow at the Ludwig von Mises Institute and author of Defending the Undefendable, among other titles. Welcome, Walter.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm delighted to be here with you, Aaron and Zoe.
Yeah, glad to be back. And we also have with us today special commentator Zoe Russell. Zoe is a graduate of Auburn University in business economics. She attended Mises University 2009 and continues her study of free market economics in Houston, Texas. So welcome, Zoe.
Hi, good to be here.
Okay, so today's show is the second part of an interview we did with Dr. Block based on an article he wrote called A Primer on Jobs and the Jobless. And our objective here today is to clarify the jobs question and show our audience how to create jobs for real. I think to begin this conversation, we must first ask, what are new jobs good for, Walter? What purpose do they serve? Are jobs desirable in and of themselves?
No, jobs are a bad thing. They're a pain in the neck. Otherwise, they wouldn't be jobs. But we have to have them because we have scarcity. Scarcity means we want more stuff than we have. And the only way to get it is to work harder or want less. And Gandhi, the ascetic from India, worked on scarcity in the other direction, namely he wanted less and less, although he wanted the British out of India, which is no small thing. But apart from that, he wanted very little, just his diaper and his maybe shoes and maybe some goat's milk or something like that. So his wants were very, very small. But most people aren't like that, and even he wanted that stuff. Whereas most of us, if we had a wish list, what would we like? The sun, the moon, the stars, a cure for cancer, space travel, infinite life, whatever. Lots of things that we want. And since we don't live in the Garden of Eden where stuff comes down onto us like manna, and then we sort of convert the manna into a Maserati or into, a yacht or something, we don't have that. So the only way we can get stuff that we want is to work for it, unfortunately. But that's the situation that we're in.
So you talk about in your article the Swiss family Robinson, and we know they're marooned on a desert island. You take us out at a complex economy and show us an economy on the individual level. Can you tell us their story and how it shows that we don't just work for no reason?
Yes, I think the Swiss family Robinson is a good example. They're marooned on some desert island, and they've got a lot of wants and not that much stuff. They've got a wrecked ship and then maybe a hammer and a saw and a few other things, but they need a house to protect them from wild animals. They need to catch some fish. They need to maybe start building a rowboat so they can get out of there eventually. They have a lot of things that they have to do. Now, suppose the 10-year-old is told, okay, go fish, and he gets one fish a day. But he's a bright young lad, and what he does is he builds a net, and now he can make 5 fish a day, and the family, doesn't need that many fish. So he's now unemployed. Well, is this a bad thing? No, it's not a bad thing, because he's unemployed due to the fact of his own brilliance. And now the family can assign him to some other job. And now they can have all the fish they want, or they can have 5 fish a day instead of 1 fish a day. Plus, they can have other things, or they can have 1 fish a day, and since it only takes them, a half hour, an hour to get that 1 fish, 3/4 or 4/5 of his day is now free to do something else. So what I was trying to do here is to get at Ludditism, the idea that machinery will take our jobs away. And the point that Henry Hazlitt makes, a very famous Austrian economist, it's not that we want jobs, it's that we want the things that jobs give us. And in the case of the Swiss family Robinson, we want the fish that this job gave us. And if we can get the fish without the work, because this kid is so brilliant, he makes a net or whatever, well, then that's great.
Let me interrupt you there, Walter. We've got to head to a break, but we'll be right back with Radio Free Market. Thank you for listening to Radio Free Market. We're here back with Dr. Walter Block. We were just discussing the Swiss Family Robinson. The boy can catch more fish with his net. With his limited resources, including time, he can do much more. Can you elaborate on the idea?
Yeah, what I'm trying to illustrate is Ned Ludd. What happened, this guy was, I forget what century, maybe the 18th century, and before that, the way they knitted shirts and woolens and stuff was the old-fashioned way of knitting that you see old ladies, well, young ladies too, knit. And then they came up with the loom, and the loom could create, one person could create as many sweaters or as many clothing goods as 20 people before the old-fashioned way. And Ned Ludd said, whoa, we can't have that, because if one person creates 20 sweaters where one person, where it used to take 20 people to create 20 sweaters, well, 19 people will be unemployed. So we did, him and his buddies, they went around knitting looms on the ground that he was saving jobs. He didn't realize that we don't need jobs. What we need is the clothing that the jobs make possible. A modern-day Luddite is Ted Kaczynski, who was the Unabomber. He would go and actually bomb factories because factories were producing a lot of stuff. Right now at Loyola University, New Orleans, they're putting in some building. They're uncovering some pipes. They're digging holes. And the way they're doing it is with steam shovels. And it takes one or two or three people, and they can make a big hole in the ground in a couple of days. Whereas if you had people with picks and shovels, it would take, hundreds of people a month. And if they were doing it with teaspoons, it would take thousands of people a year. So we could create jobs endlessly, but the point is not to create jobs. The point is to create the stuff. If we wanted to create millions of jobs, what we could do is get rid of all trains and 18-wheeler trucks and have people ship stuff on their back in the form of 50-pound sacks from New Orleans to, where are you guys living?
Houston,
from New Orleans to Houston or to California even better yet because it's further away. We could create billions of jobs, but the point is that if we did that, then we wouldn't have all the other things that people could do. So I keep reiterating the brilliant Hazlitt point that we want is productivity. We don't want jobs. Jobs are a necessary evil. They're an evil because, they're a pain in the neck. We don't want to do them. We'd rather play, but we have to work sometimes in order to create goods and transmit them hither and thither.
Mm-hmm. And in preparation for this show, we wanted to lead off with that point because that is the crux of the argument that jobs are not good enough themselves. If we could create machines that, as Dr. Block says, would bring down goods like manna from heaven, even though there were less jobs, that would still be a wonderful thing because we would have the goods that we require to be happy and go out and play and have a high quality of life. So it is the things that jobs create that is the good. The jobs are not the good part. As Dr. Block said, jobs are unpleasant. No one likes jobs. So we want the goods and services that jobs create.
And with regard to play, sometimes you think of playing and you think, well, you play basketball, you play chess. Well, some people could play at creating symphonies or creating new plays or inventing new things to get us to Mars in a better way or whatever. Or
being economics professors.
Being economics professors. Thank you.
Okay, so the first, one of the topics, really the one that I really wanted to touch on in the first show, but we ran out of time, is licensing laws. And I wanted to talk about licensing laws and how they affect employment or unemployment. And this is a hugely important topic and one that should be studied extensively by every listener. We're going to discuss how licensing laws increase unemployment and they drive up the cost of everything. So I'm just going to throw out a few stats to begin this segment on licensing laws. There were a study that Michael McKay showed me in preparation for this show. Dentists were able to charge 11% more in states with the most restrictive licensing laws. In the 1950s, 5% of workers needed a license. Now 20% are in an occupation that need a license to work. And approximately 30%, 1 out of every 3 workers nationwide, needs a government license to do their job. So, Walter, most people take licenses for granted as a good thing because if, what would the world be like if there were haircutters and manicurists who didn't have licenses? Wouldn't there just be a bunch of hoodlums and swindlers out there?
Well, that's the argument in favor of it, but what you're really doing is you're harking back to the Middle Ages where you had the guild system, where you just couldn't start being a plumber or a carpenter or a candlestick maker or a baker or whatever. You had to get permission of the guild, and the guild didn't want to give you permission because they wanted to keep fewer people in there, and the fewer the people and the fewer the candles in the bakery goods, the higher the price. So this is a medieval kind of a system. Now, yes, we do want quality. We don't want, you don't want to go to a doctor, say, to take the most favorable case for licenses. You don't want to go to a doctor and, who's that doctor on The Simpsons, that crazy guy where he...
Dr. Nick.
Dr. Nick, that's right. You don't want a Dr. Nick where you go to Dr. Nick and he sort of takes a buzzsaw and he cuts off your arm because your nose hurts or something like that. I'm exaggerating, but that's roughly Dr. Nick. Equality. And Milton Friedman is very good on this one in his book, Capitalism and Freedom. I'm not usually a fan of Milton Friedman because I think he's too weak on free enterprise, but on occupational licensure, he is sound as a bell. He is magnificent. And what he says is, look, if you have a monopoly licensing agency like the AMA or these hospitals, what they're going to do is restrict entry. They're not going to restrict entry in order to improve quality. They're going to restrict entry in order to keep people out so that their salaries can go up. And he has all sorts of evidence that that's what's going on. For example, foreign doctors. They make foreign doctors take exams in English. Well, why in English? Which precludes a lot of doctors who have some English, but English is a second language. Mm-hmm. Aren't there unconscious patients? And couldn't a non-English speaking doctor take care of unconscious patients? And what about, say, somebody from, Portugal? Couldn't he take care of fellow Portuguese or other people who speak Portuguese, like from Brazil? And that's why God invented translators. It might cost more to get a nurse who could translate, but that should be no one's business. So what Milton Friedman says is that what the AMA is doing is precluding entry. They're keeping people out so that doctors can make more money, and they've succeeded to a great degree. Doctors make a lot more money than they would in the free enterprise system, where entry were free in the sense that no one was licensed, but you would have to be certified. So what's the difference between certification and licensing? Well, in licensing, if you don't have the license, you can't practice. In certification, like the CPA, Certified Public Accountant, you have to pass a test by, the Harvard Medical School or someone like that, or the Acme Insurance Agency. And if you don't pass the test, well, you can still practice. You can be a Dr. Nick, but you can't hang up a shingle saying certified by the Harvard Medical School. Mm-hmm. And most people would, look before they leap. Before they go to Dr. Nick, they'd say, well, who certified you? And Dr. Nick would say, well, my mother did, or Homer Simpson did, or something like that, and people just wouldn't go to him. So the point that Milton Friedman makes is that you get higher quality from a competitive certification industry. Like suppose somebody certifies Dr. Nick, and Dr. Nick kills someone. Well, that certification agency is going to go broke. Whereas suppose the AMA certifies a doctor who is very bad. Well, they never go broke because they're the monopoly agency. Let me just go on with one more example. This is, black people nowadays get their hair braided, very finely braided. And there are young black girls who are very good at this braiding. And they've been put in jail because they didn't go to, hair cutting school or...
Cosmetology.
Cosmetology school, yeah. Whatever it is. Thank you. And, in order to do that, you have to take thousands of hours to study biology and all sorts of crap, and these girls don't need it, and their customers are very happy, and none of them have been hurt. It's a non-issue, and yet these poor young ladies who could have good careers in hair braiding for black and white people, I suppose some white people get that, but they're not allowed to do it, and this is just a horrendous sort of a thing. The Institute for Justice, which is a very good group, has launched several lawsuits in behalf of these young ladies to try to get the government off their back.
Mm-hmm. And on that point, it's even though the licensing laws, for example, for these young black ladies, or for as a study by Morris Kleiner from the University of Minnesota showed, these stricter laws don't even noticeably affect the quality of the service. For example, this study showed that stricter licensing laws didn't noticeably affect dental health, and I would take a gander that putting these girls in jails didn't raise the quality of hair braiding.
Absolutely not, because the purpose of it is not to raise the quality. The purpose is to keep the monopoly privileges for the mainstream hair braiders or the mainstream cosmetologists or whoever they are. So that's the exact purpose of it. Another example I sometimes use is the case of thalidomide, which was a very good morning sickness drug, but it created in some small percentage babies with malfunctions, like 3 arms or 1 arm or something like that. And this was supported by the Food and Drug Administration. It was a complicated thing. The West German Food and Drug Administration supported it. The U.S. one allowed it, and didn't prohibit it. See, the problem there is we not only want to have good doctors and good hair braiders, we want to have good medicine and good pharmaceuticals. So what's the best way to do it? Is the best way to do it to give it the whole thing to the Food and Drug Administration and let them decide? Or is it better to have an industry that certifies quality of drugs? Mm-hmm. And you're free to have the drug if it's not certified, or certainly if it's not certified by the FDA. You see, if any private certification agency certified thalidomide, they would be broke or gone the next day. Nobody would patronize them, but the FDA is still in business. So that's like a type 1 error, accepting a bad drug. So now what the FDA does is engages in type 2 errors, namely it prohibits possibly good drugs. And now in order to get a new drug on the market...
Okay, Walter, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're coming close to the end of this segment. We will be back with our next segment talking with Walter Block on how to create new jobs. Please stay with us. Hello, America. We are back on Radio Free Market with Dr. Walter Block talking about how to create new jobs. And Dr. Block, you were talking about the FDA and thalidomide babies, so please continue that thought.
Right. The point is that they're now creating type 2 errors where they're putting all sorts of roadblocks in the face of introducing new medicine. It takes 10 years and many millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, and meanwhile people are dying for lack of drugs. In the free enterprise system, we would have a competitive industry, and you could do whatever you wanted. If you were an adult, you could take a drug, even though none of the agencies approved of it. It's your own risk. There are these cases where people have been given 2 months to live. They're dying of cancer, and they want to try something. They want to try experimental drugs because that's the only shot they've got, and the bloody FDA won't allow them to do it because not only does it have to be proven not harmful, but it has to be proven beneficial. And these poor people, they're at death's door, and they want to try something. They want to throw the dice, and the bloody FDA won't allow them to. I think they ought to be put in jail for murder for preventing people from trying things.
Yeah, I completely agree. It is a travesty. I know that I have a family member who just recently had cancer, and you have to go to a different country to try these treatments that the FDA does not approve of, but nevertheless they show amazing promise to be, not as sort of harmful as chemotherapy, and it is very sad that happens. And to that point, I want to ask you about the American Medical Association. We talked about that in the last segment. One of the things that we hear today is the cost of healthcare is rising. Why? The cost of healthcare is, the government really wants to try and solve this problem. But then you look at the AMA, forces all medical schools to reject 95% of all applicants. So simple supply and demand would tell us that we're going to have a shortage of doctors. Do you think this regulation that creates a shortage of doctors probably benefits existing doctors, does it not?
Yes, it benefits existing doctors, and it pumps up their prices, which makes it difficult if you're not insured. Medical insurance is why we have that whole crisis. Namely, here the government creates the problem in the first place by not allowing medical schools to accept more applicants and by not allowing new medical schools to open. And then, after creating the problem, it tries to cure it with socialized medicine, which just exacerbates the problem. Mises talked about this, where the government creates problem A and then it tries to solve it, which creates problem B, and each problem gets worse, C, D, and E, and you're off to the races.
I think that sort of segues into my question. It's always, you look back at history and then the government will take the success of capitalism as their own. So can you tell us about child labor? I know that the common belief is that if the government didn't step in and have child labor laws, we'd have sweatshops and 8-year-olds working in coal mines.
Right. Well, this is another fallacy. Look, suppose we had implemented child labor laws in 1650, right before the Industrial Revolution, and said that no children under 16 can work. What would have happened? Well, a lot of 16 and under children would have died, because we were so poor in those days, centuries ago, that if the children didn't work and create enough for them to eat, they would die. So this couldn't have worked then. Compulsory school until 16 or something like that in the year 1650 is just ludicrous. But what happened is, thank God we had the Industrial Revolution, and then we had more of a spurt due to free enterprise in the 19th century. And each time we got richer, what the government did is it started in implementing child labor laws, and it started increasing the age at which children couldn't work, thus taking credit for what the free enterprise system was doing. In other words, the reason that the fewer and fewer children had to work was we were getting richer and richer. And the reason we were getting richer and richer is because we had free enterprise and capitalism. And then the government takes credit for it by saying, see, we raised the child labor laws, we implemented them. And it's the same not only with child labor, but with hours legislation. It used to be in the bad old days, people had to work 100, 120 hours a week just to survive. And as we got richer, we could afford to work less. And then the government kept reducing the maximum hours that we could work. So they would, let's say the capitalist system was successful, and now people, instead of working 100 hours, had to work 90. So the government would now have a new law saying, well, you can't work more than 90. And then 20 years later, we could go down to 80 hours a week thanks to free enterprise and breakthroughs. And then the government would take credit for this by implementing another law. The point is that if the government implemented the law too quickly, there would be mass starvation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And true or false, a child can be fined or shut down for operating a lemonade stand without a license?
Yes, true. Unfortunately, there have been cases where some little tyke of age, 8 years old, sets up a lemonade stand in front of his house, and the government comes along and says, where's your business license? Are you exploiting your employees, like his mother and father who are getting the lemonade for him? It's just ludicrous what the government will do under the guise of helping us, and it's just sort of busybody socialism.
Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of interested about we'll have to address this in the next segment because we're coming close to the end. But in our next segment, I wanted to hear your comment on what kind of psychologically this does to the young population of 9 or 10-year-olds who wants to try and make some money, selling lemonade on the corner during the summer. What does this do to kind of the working age population who wants to make a living and make some money, but they're unable to because of the government? So we're going to have to talk about this in the next segment. Please stay with us on Radio Free Market. We're here with Dr. Walter Block.